All right, so you've got your Lectric XPedition or maybe another Lectric model or just another brand altogether, and there are noises coming from it. And so you're trying to figure out how to get rid of those noises. We're gonna go over the top noises that come from an e-bike, particularly this Lectric XPedition, and how to solve those. Majority of these I've experienced myself, and we'll go over how I personally solve them. And other ones can be more theoretical, and it's gonna be really up to you to test what works. Okay, the first thing that's gonna be common with not just this bike and not just this brand, but with a lot of electric bikes is going to be brake squeal. Yes, brake squeal. So a lot of times people think that you can just bed them, meaning there's a layer of gloss on the new pads and you're essentially going up to 20-ish miles per hour and then braking fairly hard, not necessarily to a stop, but to like 7 miles per hour. And you do that like 20 times. And then that first layer of brake pad is supposed to come off and it's supposed to go silent, and then everything's supposed to be dandy. But that did not work for me. And you're gonna scour all over the internet and they're gonna tell you that your rotors are dirty or your pads are dirty and to clean it with isopropyl alcohol. Maybe that works, but for me, it did not work for this bike, it did not work for that bike, and it did not work for that bike. So to me, they don't work, okay? But maybe it does for other people. So the solution for brake squeal is going to be resin pads. Yes, resin pads. So resin pads, also known as organic pads. It's a different composition. There's organic, there's semi-metallic, and there's metallic. And there's one other one. I forgot the name of it. The more metallic it is, the more aggressive it's going to be on your rotors, which means you're gonna have to replace your rotors sooner. So the resin pads are gonna be a little bit softer and gonna be a lot more quiet of all the options of brake pads. And then brake pads are gonna be very cheap. I mean, on Amazon, I found 4 pairs for $9. That's cheaper than where I usually get stuff, which is AliExpress. Of course, you can get Shimano, you can get name brand ones, you can go to your local bike shop or whatnot, and they're gonna be probably about $12 a pair, which I don't know. I'm gonna let you be the judge of the pricing. But for resin pads, that's what I went with for this bike and for that bike. This one I have not yet changed to resin pads, but for the 2 e-bikes here, resin pads was the solution and worked right away. Okay, so if resin pads are so good, what are the drawbacks? All right, you're wondering why e-bike companies put semi-metallic or metallic pads on there. I'm not gonna be able to tell you why because I really don't know, but the disadvantage of resin pads is that they are not as strong. Are you gonna notice how strong they are? If chances are, if you have a budget e-bike, you're not a cyclist who is converted to an electric bike, and you're probably not gonna notice, okay? You're probably not gonna notice. And the advantage of resin pads is that they will work hard right away. With metallic and semi-metallic, they need to heat up, meaning you need to be going kind of fast and using for a little while before you get a really strong, hard bite. With resin pads, you get the maximum effectiveness right away. And resin pads also do well in all weather. So there are some advantages of resin pads. Again, I don't know why e-bike companies haven't put them in stock. I don't think it's a pricing issue, but they haven't, and resin pads has been the solution, as I said, for a couple bikes, and I think it's worth your few dollars to try it. Surely you're gonna ask me what brake pads to get and what fits on the XPedition. So this is the brake pad that fits on the XPedition, and basically if the brake pad looks like this, then it'll fit. There's various different shapes of brake pads, but it's not like there's a variant to this particular shape that's off by a couple millimeters and you need to get the exact right one. As long as it looks like this with a little hole in the top and a little hook on the right, then that's gonna be the one. And this is the metallic pad, it's the older one. You'll see that it has kind of a black finish to it. The resin pad will be organic and it's gonna be kind of a peach or brownish tone color for the pads. And you'll see little bits of fiber inside the pad for resin. Sound number 2 is also gonna be the brakes. As you're riding, you're gonna hear kind of a shh, 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 shh. And that just means that the brake pads are not evenly on the caliper. The rotors are brushing up against the caliper at certain points of the rotation of the wheel. And so what you're gonna do is actually I'm gonna turn the camera around so you can see a little bit better, and then we'll go over how to make the adjustment. All right, let's go over the parts. So this is the frame, and this is the caliper mounting bracket, and this is the caliper itself. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna loosen this bolt, okay? So this bolt and this bolt, and that's part of the caliper. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna loosen that so that it can move kind of towards the center and out of the bike. So in this position, it's gonna be able to move kind of shift left and right, and that's how you know it's loose enough. So once you loosen that, you're gonna go ahead and go to your brake lever, okay? And you're gonna gently pull that until it's fully braked or fully in the brake position. And while you're holding that brake, you are going to tighten these two bolts. So what that's gonna do is it's gonna square off or make even the calipers in relationship to the rotor. And then once you let go of once you're done tightening these, you're gonna go ahead and let go of the brake lever and it should be square. Annoying sound number 3 is going to be coming from the front. And you're like, what's that sound? It's so annoying. And for me, there's gonna be a few sources to that problem, apparently and unfortunately. But for me, notice that there is no fender. The fender has been removed off the front wheel. And I have tightened the fender thinking that maybe the fender was loose and so it was kind of rattling, but as tight as I've done it, it still rattled. And I suspect that because of the air that's kind of coming in between the top of the wheel and the inside of the fender, that it's kind of shaking, it's vibrating and creating that sound. It's also possible, although I think it's less likely, is that it's kicking up rocks and debris on the tire and then kind of hitting it into the inside of the fender and creating that kind of clanging noise. I have ridden this on very smooth roads and still heard that sound. So I do suspect really that it's the fender that's making that vibrating sound. And so once I removed it, that sound went away right away. So we know that that is the solution because that was the problem. For those of you who are really into fenders, I'm not sure what else you can do. Maybe you can find some way to secure it a little bit better or find a new plastic fender or a fender that has a little bit more clearance between the top of the wheel and the inside of the fender itself. Sound number 4, people are saying comes from inside the down tube, and accessing that's gonna be a little bit tough. So what other people have done, although I myself have not had this issue, other people have stuck in a paper towel or some sort of foam tube or something in this little gap. So you'll notice I put tape on here thinking that it was the plastic grommet that was shaking. And we'll go ahead and remove that just so you can see what grommet I'm talking about because I no longer need this. This is the plastic grommet, this circular thing where all the wires are feeding into. So this plastic grommet isn't tightly glued or adhered to the frame. So this thing tends to vibrate, which is what I thought was making the noise, but I do think it was only the fender and not necessarily the fender in conjunction with this. So I am taking this off and then we'll go for another test ride, but I don't believe that's making the sound that I was having a problem with. But if you are, it may be worth taping this grommet to the frame like I did with electrical tape just so it doesn't stand out too much. And again, if you need to dampen the noise, people suspect that the wiring in here, around here, I guess, is making some noises. So if you put something in there, then essentially that prevents any room for any of the wires or anything in there from rattling around while you're riding. Do note that there are 2 routes where wires are going into the bike frame. So this is the bottom, below the crankset, and this is where the wires are coming in from. So there may be some vibrating sounds of plastic or zip ties or something on the inside of there. So people have found luck putting foam in there. I personally would not use spray foam because that stuff is gonna be a lot harder to get out. And if you ever need to access this to fix anything or replace any wiring, it is going to be a huge headache. Clang sound number 5, which is I'm most proud of because I figured it out yesterday. And I just came back for a test ride and it works perfectly. So this has to do with the running boards down here. Want to get a little closer look? So what's happening is the running boards are, well, prior to my fix, are kind of rattling and shaking. So I'm gonna tell you where that's coming from and how to do the fix. I'm gonna show you beneath the running board so you kind of remember how this was attached. There's a little button here, okay, that is attached to this tube, which goes into the frame. And what's happening is there's some play between the inner dimension of this tube versus the outer dimension of this tube. So essentially there's a tiny, tiny little gap in here and also on the other side where it's rattling and shaking, particularly while you're riding. When kids are actually on here, then their feet are on here, and so it's not gonna be shaking as much. But if you're riding by yourself, then there's gonna be a lot of rattling. So we're gonna go over the solution for that. And it requires it does require a tool, but doesn't require any sort of other things you need to buy. Okay, my first thought was to thicken this tube by putting electrical tape around it or some sort of some sort of tape to basically make it thicker so that there would be no gap between the outside dimension of this black piece and the inside dimension of this white piece. But I thought, aha, there might be a better way, and there is. So right now the tubes are in here, and you would think that they should go into the holes parallel. But what happens is when it's parallel, it's not snug, and then you get the play. So what I did was, I'm gonna exaggerate with my hands here, but the tube on the bottom, my hand's gonna represent the tube, instead of going in straight, it's gonna go in at an angle, okay? And then on this side, it's gonna go in an angle. And so how you're gonna do that in practicality is you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna loosen these two bolts. Okay, it's gonna be the same for both sides. You're gonna loosen these, and then you're gonna pull this to forward of the bike, okay? As fairly firm, as hard as you can, while screwing that in tight, okay? Not too tight, but tight enough so that it's not moving around. And then on this portion, okay, the inside part of the tube, you're gonna push. So you're gonna push that direction. And then while you're doing that, you're gonna tighten this. So essentially the tube underneath is being forced to go in this direction, okay, as opposed to straight in. And so what that does, it's gonna be misaligned, which is actually what you want, so that there is no gap, okay? So this is gonna go in, again, in this direction, and this tube, you're gonna do the opposite, and it's gonna go in that direction. And once that's done, there's no play. I'm moving this, and there's no play. Before, there was tons and tons of play. Okay, that was gonna conclude the video, but there's one more sound that's coming from the front basket that I have a theory on how to fix, and I have not done that yet, but we're gonna go over that right now, and then I will update the description if it works out. All right, let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that is my light. So Lectric forgot to include the extension cord that goes from here to the front mount. So while they're mailing that to me, I just literally just taped this to the basket. And I don't think that the rattling sound that I'm experiencing is coming from this necessarily, although it could be. If I do find that that's not the source of the rattling and it's something else, I'm assuming that it's basically this basket vibrating with the mount, which is this piece, because this piece and this piece are two different pieces. So if I do find that's the rattling, it's probably gonna be two hard pieces touching each other. And so I may put some foam on the underside of this piece and the top of this piece beneath all the touch points, which is basically these two and up in the front, and then possibly, actually these don't really touch, but maybe here as well if I need to. Okay, so hopefully that helped you out. If there are other sounds that you've discovered on your bike or that you found other solutions to, please do share that in the comments below. We'll hopefully make this kind of the go-to video and people can access it as a resource and figure out how to solve their problem. So again, if you have some valuable information you want to share, please do so in the comments below and we can help out the electric bike community. All right, take care, bye-bye.